no children. You said she was nothing.
Wait, honey, listen to me. I can explain.
Don't let us interrupt, Daniel. After all, you sent the invitation. You wanted me to see everything I lost, remember?
The woman standing quietly at the entrance wasn't there to ruin his wedding. She was there because years earlier he had destroyed her life. But to understand why the richest man in the room suddenly looked like the poorest soul alive, we have to go back to the days when all he owned was a dream, and the woman who believed in it more than he did. If you love emotional stories where karma always finds its way back, subscribe now and stay until the end, because this wedding is about to turn into the biggest public humiliation of his life. Now, let me show you how it all began. Her name was Amara. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't raised in luxury. She grew up in a modest neighborhood where people measured riches by the love inside a home instead of the money inside a bank account. From a young age, she learned that real love wasn't just spoken, it was proven through sacrifice. If you loved someone, you stood beside them when life became difficult. You carried them when they were too weak to walk. That belief would one day become both her greatest strength and her greatest tragedy. Then she met Daniel. He was brilliant, charming, and full of impossible dreams. He had no wealthy parents, no powerful connections, no inheritance waiting for him. All he possessed was an old laptop, countless business ideas, and a determination so fierce it made people either admire him or laugh at him. Most people laughed. They called him unrealistic. They said dreams didn't pay rent. They told Amara she was wasting the best years of her life on a man who had nothing. But when Daniel looked into her eyes and whispered, "One day, I'll give you the life you deserve," she believed every single word. Not because he was already successful, but because she believed in the man behind the promise. Against everyone's advice, they got married. There were no grand ballrooms, no famous musicians, no designer gowns. Just a tiny church, a handful of family members, borrowed decorations, and two young people convinced that love could survive anything. Reality didn't take long to test that belief. Their apartment was barely large enough for two people. Rain leaked through the roof during storms. Sometimes the electricity disappeared for days because they couldn't pay the bills. The refrigerator often held more empty shelves than food. Every month, the landlord knocked on the door with less patience than the month before. Still, every morning Daniel left the apartment carrying hope. He chased investors, attended meetings that led nowhere, pitched ideas to people who barely listened before rejecting him. He returned home exhausted, but never defeated. And every evening, Amara welcomed him with the same warm smile, even when she herself was falling apart. She became the foundation beneath his dream. Before sunrise, she worked at a supermarket stacking shelves and serving impatient customers. In the evenings, she tutored neighborhood children until her voice grew hoarse. On weekends, she joined catering teams, carrying heavy trays at weddings where strangers celebrated lives she could barely imagine. She slept only a few hours each night. Sometimes she skipped meals so Daniel could eat. When money became impossible, she quietly began selling the pieces of her own life. First, her earrings, then the bracelet her late grandmother had given her, then every wedding gift they had received. Finally, she stood in front of a jewelry buyer holding the necklace her mother had worn for decades before placing it around her daughter's neck on her wedding day. The buyer quoted a price. Amara closed her eyes for just a second. Then she nodded. She walked away without looking back. It was family. It was memory. It was love. And she exchanged all of it for one more chance to keep Daniel's dream alive. She never told him what she had sacrificed. She simply smiled whenever he asked where the money came from. Years passed. Then everything changed. One investor finally said yes. One opportunity became 10. One successful contract became hundreds. Daniel's company exploded almost overnight. The same people who had mocked him suddenly wanted meetings. Newspapers called him a visionary. Television stations invited him for interviews. Luxury cars replaced crowded buses. Tailored suits replaced faded shirts. The tiny apartment gave way to a mansion with gates taller than the building they once lived in. Success didn't simply change Daniel's lifestyle, it changed his heart. The wealthy friends who surrounded him smiled politely at Amara's face, but mocked her the moment she walked away. They called her provincial, too ordinary, too quiet, too unsophisticated. She doesn't belong in our world, they whispered. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to breathe. She stood on the balcony of their beautiful new home, looked at the city lights below, and whispered to herself, "We made it." She truly believed their years of suffering had finally ended. She couldn't have been more wrong. Success didn't simply change Daniel's lifestyle, it changed his heart. The wealthy friends who surrounded him smiled politely at Amara's face, but mocked her the moment she walked away. They called her provincial, too ordinary, too quiet, too unsophisticated. She doesn't belong in our world, they whispered. At first, Daniel defended her. Then he stopped defending her. Eventually, he started agreeing with them. He stopped inviting her to important events. He told her her dresses looked cheap. He corrected the way she spoke. He criticized her table manners. He laughed whenever she asked innocent questions about the wealthy circles he now belonged to. Little by little, the woman who had built his future became someone he was ashamed to stand beside. The painful part wasn't that strangers judged her. It was that the man whose life she had saved began seeing her through their eyes. Still, Amara refused to give up. She believed every marriage faced difficult seasons. She kept hoping the man she had fallen in love with was still somewhere beneath the expensive suits and luxury watches. Then one morning, life gave her news she thought would heal everything. She was pregnant, not with one baby, with twins. Her hands trembled as she stared at the test results. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She imagined Daniel lifting her into the air with joy. She imagined decorating a nursery together. She imagined tiny footsteps filling their silent mansion with laughter. Certain this miracle would bring back the husband she had lost, she rushed home with the happiest heart she'd carried in years. Instead of flowers, instead of celebration, instead of love, Daniel slid a folder across the table. Divorce papers. The world seemed to stop spinning. With shaking hands, Amara reached into her bag and placed the pregnancy test in front of him. "I wanted this to be a surprise," she whispered. For one brief second, she waited for his face to soften. It never did. Daniel laughed. Not from happiness, from cruelty. He accused her of getting pregnant to trap him now that he was rich. He claimed she had planned everything to secure his fortune. Then, without an ounce of shame, he revealed the truth. He was leaving her for another woman, the glamorous daughter of a billionaire, a woman who, according to him, actually belonged beside a man of his status. The words struck harder than any slap ever could. Then he ordered security to remove the woman who had once sacrificed everything for him. Amara walked out of the mansion carrying no suitcase, no money, no dignity left to protect. Only two tiny heartbeats growing inside her. The children their father had already rejected before they were even born. But fate has a way of remembering every sacrifice and every betrayal. The question is, when the truth finally catches up with Daniel, will all the money in the world be enough to save him? The cold rain soaked through Amara's clothes long before the tears stopped falling. One suitcase, one folder containing divorce papers, one tiny pregnancy test still clutched tightly in her trembling hand. That was all she had left after giving everything to the man who had promised to love her forever. She stood outside the towering mansion she had once called home, watching the massive iron gates close in front of her. The sound echoed through the empty street like the final chapter of a life she no longer recognized. Behind those gates were the dreams she had built. Ahead of her was nothing but uncertainty. For the first time since she met Daniel, Amara had nowhere to go. No parents waiting with open arms. No relatives wealthy enough to rescue her. No close friends who even knew what had happened. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her husband had become homeless in a single afternoon. She wandered the streets until exhaustion forced her to sit on a lonely bus stop bench. The city moved around her as if she didn't exist. Cars rushed past. Couples laughed together. Street vendors shouted for customers. Life continued. Only hers had stopped. She lowered her head into her hands. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe love really did make people foolish. Maybe sacrificing everything for another person was nothing more than a beautiful lie. Dark thoughts crept quietly into her mind. She imagined simply disappearing, ending the unbearable pain before it swallowed what little remained of her. Then, almost instinctively, her hand rested on her stomach. 2 tiny lives. 2 innocent hearts beating beneath her own. They had done nothing wrong. They hadn't asked to be brought into a broken world. Yet they depended entirely on her. At that very moment, Amara made a promise that would define the rest of her life. If the whole world rejects us, I won't. Those words became the foundation she would stand on whenever life tried to knock her down again. But promises are easy to make. Keeping them is another story. The months that followed tested her in ways no human heart should ever endure. Finding work while visibly pregnant proved almost impossible. Interview after interview ended the same way. We'll call you. They never did. Some employers smiled politely before choosing someone else. Others didn't even bother hiding their judgment. One manager looked directly at her growing stomach and sighed. We need someone reliable. The words cut deeper than he could ever imagine. Reliable? She had worked 3 jobs to build another person's future. She had sold every valuable thing she owned without complaining. She had remained loyal when poverty chased everyone else away. And now, she was considered unreliable simply because she was carrying life. Eventually, she found temporary cleaning jobs that paid barely enough to survive. She scrubbed office floors after business executives had gone home. She washed restaurant kitchens late into the night. Some mornings, she woke with swollen feet so painful she could barely stand. Still, she kept working, because every kick from the babies reminded her why she couldn't afford to stop. Then, the day arrived, earlier than expected. A sharp pain tore through her body while she was cleaning the floor of a small grocery store. The mop slipped from her hands. Another contraction, then another. The store owner rushed her to a government hospital where overcrowded hallways echoed with crying babies and anxious families. Everyone seemed to have someone holding their hand. Everyone, except Amara. No husband, no mother, no father. No one. She faced hours of unimaginable pain with nothing but silent prayers and stubborn determination. When the first baby's cry finally filled the room, tears streamed down her face. A little boy, healthy, strong. Moments later came another cry. A little girl, just as healthy. The nurse placed both babies gently into her arms. For several seconds, the world became completely silent. All the betrayal, all the humiliation, all the heartbreak. It disappeared beneath the weight of 2 tiny miracles staring back at her. She kissed each forehead softly. My precious children, you will never spend a single day wondering whether you're loved. Outside that hospital room, the world still felt cruel. Inside it, a new purpose had been born. She named her son Ethan. Her daughter became Emma. From that day forward, every decision she made belonged to the 3 of them. The years that followed weren't measured by birthdays or holidays. They were measured by sacrifices, sleepless nights, comforting sick children while reporting to work before sunrise, skipping meals so the twins could drink milk, walking long distances because transportation cost too much, borrowing library books instead of buying toys, mending torn uniforms by hand because replacing them wasn't an option. There were nights when Amara cried herself to sleep after the twins had fallen asleep beside her. Not because she regretted becoming their mother, but because she feared she would never be enough. Yet every morning, Ethan and Emma erased those fears without realizing it. Tiny arms wrapped around her neck, messy kisses on her cheeks, childish laughter filling their modest apartment. Whenever people asked where their father was, the twins looked toward their mother. Amara never poisoned their hearts, never filled them with bitterness, never taught them hatred. Instead, she simply smiled and answered with quiet dignity. Sometimes adults make choices. That was all. No insults, no revenge, just truth. But while Amara fought invisible battles every single day, the man who had abandoned them was living a life that looked perfect from the outside. Daniel's business empire continued growing beyond anyone's expectations. Every month seemed to bring another award, another luxury acquisition, another magazine cover. Beside him, his glamorous fiancée dazzled cameras with designer gowns, expensive jewelry, and flawless smiles. The media adored them. They became the country's favorite power couple. Business magazines praised Daniel's vision. Lifestyle magazines praised their romance. Social media overflowed with comments, calling them couple goals. People envied the fairy tale. No one knew the fairy tale had been built upon another woman's heartbreak. Not once, not a single time, did Daniel wonder whether Amara had survived. Not once did he ask whether his unborn children had been born safely. As far as he was concerned, they no longer existed. But karma has an unusual habit. It waits patiently. Years passed before destiny quietly opened a door neither of them saw coming. It began on an ordinary afternoon.